Bring in now Paul Fletcher, the Minister for Families and Social Services. Minister, can you explain to us, first of all, the initiatives that the Prime Minister will announce today in terms of dealing and trying to combat domestic and family violence?
Well, yes, good morning, Kieran and Laura. So we're announcing today $78 million to help women and children escaping from domestic violence. $18 million of that to extend an existing program, keeping women safe in their homes. So this is where the perpetrator leaves the home, the woman and children stay, and then there's funding to assist with the new security, new locks and that kind of thing. But also, even more excitingly, $60 million being committed to a program for grants for eligible organisations to fund, to build new or expanded emergency accommodation places. We have a shortage of emergency accommodation for women fleeing domestic violence. All too often, a woman in this situation jumps in the car with only the clothes on her back and then needs to find somewhere to go. We have a real shortage of places, and so what we're committing is $60 million to increase the stock of emergency accommodation for women and children fleeing domestic violence around Australia.
Minister, if you're putting in initiatives to ensure that women in domestic violence situations can stay at home, why do you need $60 million for more emergency accommodation?
So what we need is a range of responses to the problem of domestic violence, and this will form part of the Commonwealth's contribution to the 4th Action Plan under the National Plan to Combat Violence Against Women and Children, and further initiatives will be announced over coming months, and the 4th Action Plan runs from 2019 to 2022. But what we're announcing today is a couple of elements of that, and when we think about the overall system, one of the issues we have is that there's not enough emergency accommodation. I've seen it in my own electorate with the Hornsby Ku-ring-gai Women's Shelter, which has been going for several years now, and every night, most nights, they're having to turn away women because they don't have enough spaces for the need. And when you talk to people on the front line around the country working on this issue, we have a shortage of emergency accommodation, and that's why we're committing this significant capital funding with the intention of increasing the stock of emergency accommodation for women and children escaping domestic violence.
Let's get your reaction to Christopher Pyne's comments to the Sydney Morning Herald today, where he spoke about irrational pressure on your colleagues and from shouty segment of the press and constant social media. He said that keeps everyone on edge, and basically it was irrational pressure that got to your colleagues in the end. What do you make of his critique?
Look, the media is one aspect of the complex environment within which our system of politics and government works. There's plenty of other aspects as well. We take it as a given and we get on with providing the best possible government that we can, as Christopher himself is doing in his portfolio with an announcement of the signing of a submarine contract, part of our unprecedented investment in the Defence Forces, as I'm doing with Kelly O'Dwyer, my colleague, and the Prime Minister, announcing $78 million to keep women and children safe from domestic violence today. Across all of our portfolios, across all of government, our Liberal National team is focused on providing good government. You simply have to take the situation you're in and get on and do the best you can.
Given how close we are to an election, Minister, you must have some renewed interest in where Newspoll is at. Interesting figures today. The gains that your government got over Christmas seem to have held in the last couple of weeks. Why is that? Is that a judgment on how the government handled the Banking Royal Commission fallout, or is it something else?
Look, I'll leave that to the commentators, but what I would say is that Labor's prevarication in relation to border protection just shows how high the stakes are in this election. I mean, Bill Shorten seems to be ready to go along with a bill proposed by Independents and Greens that would dramatically weaken offshore protection and runs the risk of the disaster we saw in border protection under the previous Labor government being repeated if Mr Shorten...
Well, he's been briefed this morning, so there's still that's looking unlikely.
But
It's like he's going to back away from
Well, let's bear in mind that he was ready to sign on to it just before Christmas. I mean, you cannot trust Labor on border protection, and we've seen, if any more evidence be required of that, with Mr Shorten, the approach that he's taking on this bill, it's very clear you just cannot trust Labor to keep our borders safe.
Minister for Families and Social Services, Paul Fletcher, thanks as always. Thank you.